Hello everyone, and welcome to another part of What If Naruto was in Genshin. If you enjoy the video, please like, subscribe and share the video. I did not write this story. The writer is Neon Zangetsu. Please go and support them. Now let's us dive in. Wind met water. Naruto lunged at Child and the world dissolved into a mindless blur of violence. Their weapons clashed. Once, twice, thrice. On the fourth the Harbinger struck low and he went high, skyward, spine smashing through his hydro daggers as though they didn't exist. Back he stumbled. Naruto didn't give him time to recover. Even as the stunned redhead retreated, he advanced, sweeping the young man's dominant arm aside to strike in at his chest. Like any sensible warrior, Child instinctively tried to block, and mistakes were made. The very moment his adversary went on the defensive, Naruto pressed his advantage, hammering down attack after attack against his guard. Child grimaced and took a step back. And another. Yet another now. A glimmer of concern flashed across his face as he tried to ward him off and failed. Parry, parry, parry. Naruto stoked his fears with a snarl. Is that all you can do? You were talking a good game early. He swept in, forcing him to block or lose a leg. Skyward Spine howled in triumph and changed course at the last instant. Blood flew through the air. Ack? Child staggered with a grunt, clutching at a cut just above his ribs. Not bad. He straightened, grimacing at his bloody palm. I didn't think you were this strong. Maybe I should take this seriously after all. An outraged snarl swelled in the street behind them. Naruto craned his neck to regard the noise. Child joined him, only to wince as Rosaria hurtled past and struck a wall. Shinha stalked after her, luminescent eyes fixed firmly on the nun. She said not a word as she sashayed past. Both men grimaced. Eventually, the former sighed. Looks like your comrade's in a bit of a pinch. She's no ally of mine, the Harbinger offered a selfsame smile and a shrug. Like she said, it's an alliance of convenience. Nothing more. Now where were we? Cocky bastard. I'll beat that out of him. A beatific smile was answer. I was smashing you into the ground. Child scoffed. Bold words, but I'm pretty sure you weren't doing anything of the sort. An open palm slammed up into the redhead's chin, rendering his words a startled gurgle as his head snapped back and his body found itself launched skyward. Naruto caught his ankle before he could reach escape velocity. 5 firm fingers squeezed, echoing the smile he wore. Bright blue eyes bulged. Golden orbs narrowed. Then he pivoted and whipped him face first into the ground, leaving a decidedly child-shaped impression behind. Back and forth he went. Now forth and back. Ever on the attack. Time and time again he smashed him into the ground like a proverbial flail, silently reveling in the Harbinger's pained cries as he crashed back and forth. Was it wrong to torment an opponent like this? Undoubtedly. Was he disrespecting him? Almost certainly. Did he enjoy it? Very much so. Puny Harbinger. On the 9th slam he finally had enough of the game and let Child go, leaving him lay in the cratered street. An unmanly squeak of pain reached his ears, and he saw the Harbinger's right hand twitch. Still conscious? Unacceptable. Naruto raised a hand, called a Rasengan to his palm, and brought crashing down on his foe's chest with all the force of a falling star. For the first time since he'd met him, Child cried out in pain. Screamed now, as the jutsu drilled him into the dirt. It would have been a simple matter to finish him there. In truth it was almost tempting. A quick stab with Skyward Spine and he'd be done. No. He was better than that. This is boring, he turned his back on him with a sigh. I think I've humiliated you enough for one day. A blast of water splashed harmlessly against his shoulders. He looked back. Child had found his feet once more. Stubborn bastard. I was being nice. You're afraid this fight will be boring? The Harbinger forced himself upright. Palmed his face. Blood fell from his chest to spatter the floor, chased by a throaty chuckle. Baleful blue eyes peeked between his fingers. I'll spice it up for you then. Dark light burst forth from his body with a nebulous roar. Naruto squinted at it, frowning as armor swept forth to cover his shrouded form. What is that? Foul Legacy, the Devouring Deep. Maeve stepped up beside him, momentarily claiming his attention. A powerful transformation, and a costly one, she frowned as a mask swept forth to shelter the Harbinger's visage from view. He must feel cornered. Do be careful. Your strength is praiseworthy. Child swept his weapon up, restored once more. I, too, shall use all of mine. Naruto shook his head. Laughed. When did you get the impression I was trying? You're bluffing. Child bridled. I'll wipe that smirk off your face. Naruto beckoned him on. You'll certainly try. Angry. She was angry. Terribly, horribly angry. When was the last time she'd felt like this? She couldn't remember. You disgrace yourself, servant of Mondstadt. Rosaria bridled, dragging herself up on one knees. Excuse me? Did I stutter? Shinha thrust her spear forth, parried the counter that followed, and kicked her foe. You lower yourself to work with the Fatui. The poor fool tried to defend her reasoning, and herself, as all fools do. It availed her not. We share a common goal. Yes, you do. She caught her spear, tugged it aside and drove an elbow into her face. Stupidity. Blood splashed through the air. Rosaria went down with a yelp, clutching at her savaged left arm. Not enough. Shinha snarled and cut down. An awful crack of bone filled the air as her heel struck the girl's collarbone. Her cry of pain fell on deaf ears. She was the one who had made a pact with the devil. This was her doing. She'd started this. And so, I shall end it. Calamy Queller seethed in her hands. Despite its namesake, it could not calm her rage. When the girl fought in a frenzy, she beat her down with single-minded determination. Fast, this one, but her so-called talent was naught but raw when compared to her. She had not trained in the divine adepti arts as she had. In that respect, she was but a child. Naughty children must be punished. And she was so very, very angry with her. She batted her spear down and spun away, whispering beneath her breath. Ice erupted across the street. And with it, came a word. Manifest. Child was laughing. It took Naruto a moment to realize he was, too. Against all odds, he was enjoying himself. The Harbinger, it seemed, was a man of his word. They ranged back and forth like madmen. Elements flew through the air. The heavens rattled when their weapons clashed. Once. Twice. Thrice. Smash. 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 Sparks flew as they crashed into one another time and again. Gold clashed against baleful blue-violet. He swept low. Child, high. Spear met lance as they strove against one another. Don't disappoint me, partner. Naruto strove back. Wouldn't dream of it. And then, quite suddenly, he found himself somewhere else. The gnosis in his chest sang a green melody, the world blurred, all the colors of reality fading away to black. Child vanished. Mondstadt vanished. All of it, gone in an instant. Motes of green light swayed across his vision, turning his world a rich, verdant shade. He turned, following them in his confusion. And then he saw her. A girl on a swing forged from light. Her eyes were a sparkling shade of green, her hair white on silver. Tiny little thing. Barely even a child, wrapped up in a white dress nestled with strange bits of jewelry he didn't recognize. The sight of her resonated with him. This feeling. He'd seen this before. Where? Where had he seen this before? He stood there, balking at her, not quite comprehending. Oi, oi. What the hell is this, gnosis? Where am I? He looked left, then right. Not a soul save them in sight. Who is this? What did you do? The gnosis sang in his chest. Words whispered in his mind. Lesser Lord Kusanali. Nahida. Protect. Save. Restore. She turned to face him, alarmed, having heard those very words. Who are you? Who are you? Such a simple question, and yet it held a lifetime of expectation behind it. Naruto found himself stricken by the words, staring at this baffled, helpless child in her prison, and his tongue failed him. A lonely child on a swing. Now didn't that bring back some painful memories? Nasty ones. Not good ones. His brain rebooted and he stood there, balking. Not so his instincts. They kicked in a second later. Small child. Must protect. He wanted to hug her so damn hard. She burned in his senses like a tiny green star, the fragment of that which had once been so much greater. His gnosis must have known something he didn't. It began to hum in his chest, conjuring the striking image of a green-eyed woman with pale hair, not this helpless little waif before him. Somehow, he knew her name. Or rather, what she had once been. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. She who once was and still is. Wasn't that a mouthful? Might be easier to think of her was Rukkano. No, that was the gnosis bleeding into his thoughts again. He shook his head to clear it. Sorry about that. Right, she'd asked him a question, hadn't she? A small, impish smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Nice to meet ya. I'm Naruto. I know. Her response startled him. I just wanted to confirm it. You're new. She phrased it as though it were a query, not a statement. Very new. As he looked on, she hopped off the swing and he watched it shimmer away into motes of green light behind her. Not even a century to your name. Am I? Where are we? That's the question, isn't it? Nahida touched a finger to her lips, considering the white void around them. I'd say this is a dream, but not a dream. His lips pursed in thought. Had one of those already. You haven't you? Those ageless eyes met his for a long moment, saw the truth in them, narrowed now. I suppose it shouldn't be a surprise. Each and every archon is connected, not only through their gnosis, but Irminsul itself. The words went right over his head. What now? At least you should be, but, no. Alas, the little archon paid him no heed, for her gaze widened just as suddenly. There's no information on you at all. None, whatsoever. She paced away, then back again, and he had to fight down a smile at just how adorable she looked. The question that followed proved less so. You're a descender, aren't you? His brow furrowed. Missy, you're throwing a lot of words at me I don't understand. I'll say. She lost me at Irminsul. Silence reigned supreme. Oh! Nahida shattered it with a small gasp, looking behind him with childlike wonder. That is a very large fox. Wherever did he come from? Naruto craned his neck to follow her. When did you get in here? Just now. Sure enough, Kurama's crimson bulk loomed behind him in the void, chin perched upon towering paws. He didn't look best pleased. Tried to find you and that damn gnosis yanked me in. A plume of steam escaped his maw. Don't look at me. Didn't ask to be here. And our body? On autopilot most likely. His old friend rolled a massive shoulder. Probably still kicking child around. You needn't worry. Nahida chirped. Time moves slowly here. An hour in this place amounts to only a moment on the outside. That said, she scooted a little closer, reaching a tiny hand out toward Kurama. May I? Naruto knew what she was after and turned away with a snort, trying to hide his laughter. He did not succeed. Kurama must have realized too, because eyed Nahida warily, but otherwise made no move to shy away from the petite archon. A massive crimson iris rolled down to regard her. She didn't flinch. He felt a flicker of approval from the old fox, followed by what might have been the ghost of a smile. His partner would have denied it to the day he died, but he saw it all the same. You may. Nahida needed no further encouragement, she all but scampered forward in her haste to reach Kurama. Small palms ran a hand over a towering paw, and then, still not satisfied, she stepped forward and to bury herself against his warm fur. In a matter of moments she'd all but snuggled herself against him. So warm, so soft. Kurama made a pleased noise. Of course I'm warm, girl, I have to be. I'd freeze in this fool's stomach otherwise. Naruto squawked. Oi! A minute passed. Another, now. Nahida showed no signs of budging. Ahem. Kurama coughed, a sound that rattled the ground and their teeth alike. That's quite enough. My apologies. Nahida pulled away with a pleased sigh. I lost sight of myself for a moment, there. It's been an eternity since I've had proper human contact. I've been locked away for a terribly long time. Naruto flinched. Sorry, we didn't mean. No need for apologies, she rounded on him with a small, sad little smile. Your gnosis must be resonating, she considered him, clasping both hands behind her back as she swayed in place. How curious. You really are newer, compared to me. A dazzling smile lit up her young face. I suppose that makes me your senior, doesn't it? A wry smile escaped him. He hadn't known what to think of her before, despite what his gnosis might say to him. Now? He found himself growing rather fond of this quirky girl. Still she seemed so alone. Isn't there anything we can do for you? I'm afraid not. Nahida tented her fingers and spread them apart, revealing a cradle of green light. This space is only temporary, connected by our gnosis, it cannot exist for more than a few minutes. You can't reach me through it any more than I can reach you. Something hardened in his chest. It felt like a strange hybrid of anger and grief. Who decided that? Pardon, she tilted her head and he resisted the urge to hold her tight and never let her go. You can say whatever you like, but I'm afraid this is the truth. You can't help me. It's all right, really. Compared to the other archons, I'm not all that strong. Blast it, he couldn't resist. Stop putting yourself down like that. Quick as a flash he knelt and drew Nahida into his arms. The small archon stiffened but he didn't dare let go, fearing she might bolt. You've got a friend in me, you hear? I don't care whether you're strong or weak. She quivered in his arms. You shouldn't speak so carelessly. Ain't nothing careless about it, he held her tighter. You'll always have me. I don't understand. Her voice warbled a little. Why? We've only just met. You don't owe me anything? Do I need a reason to help someone? Might as well give up, runt. He couldn't see Kurama from this angle, but he could hear the smile in his voice. Once the brat makes up his mind, nothing in the world can change it. You really are something. Dendro and Anemo, she sniffled once and buried her head into his shoulder. If there were tears, he pretended not to see that. I think I like the sound of that. I haven't had a proper friend in quite a while. She took a deep breath, rallied, and looked up at him once more. But I must caution you, you need to hold on to your gnosis, lest someone try to take it. Only one taking this back is that Bard bastard. A quick blink. You mean Barbados? Bard. Bastard. She laughed. You really are quite the character, aren't you? He couldn't help but join her, grinning as he let her go. Right back at ya. You've got a funny way of talking. I can't help it. The very moment he released her, Nahida rounded on him, hands clasped beneath her chin, eyes so bright they almost seemed to glow in the void. This is all so much and so very fascinating. I've been the youngest Archon for, well, forever. And now, I'm not. Even her enthusiasm proved catching. And to have a friend atop all this? Something about her words tugged at him. Forever? A bead of sweat ran down his brow. When you say forever, exactly how long do you mean? Nahida giggled. Oh, just 500 years, give or take. I'm really quite young. 500? The words left him in a wheeze. She forgets. His gnosis sang again inside his mind. She who once was. She who was someone more. She who must be restored. Won't you tell me more about yourself? Nahida's inquiry cut through the dialogue. Where you're from perhaps, or what you did to land yourself here. Forgive my curiosity, I haven't spoken to anyone like this in a terribly long time. A grimace tugged at the corner of his mouth. Kurama mirrored it in stoic silence. But really, what did they have to lose? Sure, why not? Might want to sit for a bit. Nahida plunked down on Kurama's paw, rapt with attention. Naruto told her his story. Nahida listened like a good little student, ironic, given how much older and more knowledgeable she was compared to him. She didn't ask a single question. Not once. And once he finished. Fascinating. That really was her favorite word, wasn't it? You really are from another world, aren't you? You've spent so little time here in Teyvat, yet you've already met 4 Archons. First Anemo, then Geo, that dream with Cryo, and now me. She clapped her hands and beamed over them. I dare say you'll encounter the other 3 soon enough at this rate. Great. More gods. Is that a good thing? Well, Nahida thumbed her chin. There's no harm in telling you. They're all much older than me, and while I don't know much of the current Pyro Archon, Hydro is a bit eccentric. She looked away with a wry grimace for reasons he didn't quite understand. To say nothing of Electro. You'll understand when you meet her. That doesn't fill me with confidence. It shouldn't. Her gaze cut back to him. Inazuma has closed its borders to the rest of the world for quite some time. Not even I know what the Raiden Shogun's up to. But, she hastened to amend at his bleak look, you're strong. Quite possibly one of the strongest beings on Teyvat right now. I'm sure you can handle anything she throws at you. A blonde brow rose. You hesitated there. She looked away. Maybe a little. I'm just having a hard time believing you're so strong without unlocking the full power of your gnosis. Pardon? Here, she beckoned him forward. Once HEW was close enough, she laid a hand on his chest. I'm sure you've had a little help from Morex, but I'll speed it along. Lively green eyes fluttered shut. Let the wind speak to you, Naruto. Open your heart to it, as you have others, and you'll reach heights you couldn't even dream of. He felt something lurch in his chest, then nothing. I don't feel any different. Nahida pouted. That's strange. It should have done something. Don't worry about it, he patted her head. The future doesn't concern me, and I don't give a damn about eternity. You're the one I'm worried about right now, you know. That got a blink from her. Me? Yes, you, he flicked her forehead. Earlier you said you were locked away. Now it was Nahida's turn to grimace, shying under his gaze. Yes, well, it's a bit of a long story. I told you mine. Naruto planted his feet. Care to tell me yours? Like you said, we've got time here. Are you certain? She blanched. Mine isn't a pleasant tale to tell. You may not find it all that enjoyable. That's for me to judge. He plunked down beside her and folded his legs beneath him. I'm not going anywhere. My body can look after itself for a while. But before that, when Nahida made a questioning noise, he reached around, plucked her from her perch atop Kurama's paw, and planted her in his lap. She squeaked in surprise. He ignored it. "Tell me how to get to Sumeru." She looked up at him, noses pulsing softly in her chest. "What do you intend to do with such knowledge? How about this?" He held out his pinky finger. "I'll tell you after you finish your story. Sound fair?" The Dendro Archon heaved a sigh and hooked hers with his. "As you wish." Nahida was an Archon of her word. Her tail proved somewhat shorter than his, surprising given her age. Or perhaps she simply had less to tell given how isolated she'd become. Regardless, she was right, it wasn't an enjoyable tale. Not at all. Nope. Not in the least. But he'd asked for it and so he listened, fists clenching at her sides. She told him of the moment of her birth and all that followed, how she'd sought to help her people even as she was sealed away, all but forgotten, neglected, abandoned. By the end, he was seething. Obliterate. Exterminate. Annihilate. Grand sages are. All right. His head bobbed in a slow nod. "I'll be sure to remember that name when I go to Sumeru." Nahida squinted a little. "When? Not if?" "Yup," he patted her head, ignoring her rising flush as he rubbed her scalp. "Need to have a word with your so-called sages. Personal-like." Some of his intent must have bled through his tone, because Nahida squeaked anew and wriggled around in his lap to face him. "Naruto, no. You can't." "Naruto, yes." His hands came down on her shoulders, rooting her in place, preventing her escape. "Can, and gonna. I just want to talk to M. Loudly. Repeatedly. With Kurama. They locked you away for 500 years, seems to me they deserve at least double that as punishment. That's the same as killing them." "Who said anything about killing?" said Fox rumbled above them. "Death is release. Release implies mercy. They will be shown none." Her pale brow furrowed. "You promise you won't kill them?" Naruto bit back a smirk. "There were worse things than death. Much worse. They won't die under my watch," he sang back. "Though they might wish they had." Nahida made to argue, saw his expression, and shook her head with a helpless shrug. "There's really no stopping you two, is there?" "Nope." Still smiling, he drew her in for a quick hug. "We'll get you out of here, and restore you. I swear." His noses pulsed happily, radiating approval. "Yes." Nahida didn't radiate approval so much as confusion. "Restore me?" She really didn't remember who she once was, did she? Well, he'd fix that. "Don't worry." He held her tight. "I'll explain it in person. Soon." A lone tear ran down her cheek. "Is that a promise?" His heart hitched. "I never go back on my word." Little arms squeezed him with fragile strength. "Before you go, I just wanted to say." Their world shattered like glass. "Watch out." Reality lurched back with a start. Naruto heard Paimon's cry. Looked down. Found a pair of familiar hydro daggers buried in his gut. Far from horror he felt only mild exasperation. Was that supposed to kill him? Really the angle was all wrong and those puny blades weren't anywhere near sharp enough. He should have aimed for the head. Or the chest, at least. Instead the transformed harbinger he'd gone for a painful injury. Bit of a disappointment, really. Child grinned at him behind his mask, unaware of what he'd just done. "I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?" Anger sparked. Naruto rolled his eyes to quell it and failed. Because the harbinger had done just that. Bastard interrupted him before he could say goodbye to Nahida, before he could impart a few last words of comfort to her. Shame on him for hurting that precious bean. "Well, say something, Borg?" His words pitched into a grunt as a hand closed around his masked visage and squeezed. Hoisted him off the ground now. Clawed fingers grasped at his hand to no avail. His grip couldn't be broken despite the disparity in their height and he brought his foe to heel in an instant. "Congratulations." Naruto rasped, uncaring of the hoarse tenor in his own voice. "You did break my concentration. Now I'll break you." Golden knuckles surged upright and struck Child's chin. The harbinger hurtled out his grasp out of the city, with a strangled yelp. Not good enough. Naruto leaped after him, caught him in midair, seized him by the face and smashed his forehead against his as they hurtled across the sky. Once. Twice. Thrice. "I'm not from around here, pal." He grinned down into Foul Legacy's cracked mask, leering at the terrified harbinger within as the clouds rushed by. "You see, where I come from we've got a little something called payback. Didn't used to believe in that sort of thing." His smile didn't waver, even when Child drove a clenched fist into the side of his face. "But now I do. Eye for an eye." He laughed at the feeble effort. "Tooth for a tooth. Pain for pain. As you're about to learn." He was still laughing when they struck the ground at speed. The plains of Mondstadt erupted in column of fiery wind. And the storm roared its triumph. Crash! Dvalin looked out the window, craning her neck towards the rising plume of napalm. Nope, she yanked the shutters shut and dove into her bed. Not messing about with any of that nonsense. He was losing. Once upon a time, the realization would have thrilled Child. To meet a foe outside the Harbingers, to find a proper rival against which he could test himself, there was nothing he'd wanted more than to find such a person, no matter who they might be. Someone he might even come to call friend, in due time. A true foe. The ultimate contest. Life was the prize, and death the punishment. Now it terrified Luz here meant death. Death meant the end of everything. He'd never see Tusser again. None of his siblings. His family. He didn't want to die. With that awful thought clawing at his mind, Child shrugged off the ash and stumbled to his feet. Distantly he became aware of his surroundings, of his crumbling armor and mask, of everything. What had once been a verdant plain was now a blasted crater miles wide and just as deep, scoured by fire and hazy wind. It would remain a scar upon this verdant green land for the rest of its days. Where'd he go? No sign of that blasted blonde. Yet he felt the Reaper's scythe at his throat nevertheless. Naruto was here somewhere, watching, waiting, while he was on his last legs. Even now the act of standing threatened to sap the last of his strength. The foul legacy transformation wasn't something to use lightly, and not for long. If he didn't end this soon. A rattling cough shook his chest, forcing him to cover his mouth. His hand came away red. Well, that's not good. I hope you're happy, Fatui. As though summoned by that very remark, the Anemo Archon appeared on his flank, utterly unscathed. He walked through the fading fire and the flames without a care in the world. That irritating little fairy of his floated behind him at a distance. Child ignored her. Because the Archon was still smiling, the crazed smile of someone who'd been pushed too far, too fast, too hard. You've done it now. What in blazes are you? He cursed himself for the warble in his voice even as he said the words. You're more than an Archon. It's as you say, his head bobbed. I am the Anemo Archon. Whether I like it or not. Unfortunately for you, wind has always been my natural element. And now? A hand rose. High above their heads, dark clouds rushed and the sky turned black. The gnosis burned green in his chest. Let me show you my secret weapon. When he spoke, another voice resonated with him. And so he began. I am the freedom of the sky. Child scoffed. What is that? A chant. Don't think it'll stop me from? Wind is my body and clouds are my blood. Around him the world rippled, wind whipping across the grass, tearing through the heavens. Paimon clasped her hands. Oh, geez. Paimon isn't prepared for something like this. Child agreed. What was that? What the hell was he making? I have withstood over 1,000 storms. Naruto's head snapped up, blue eyes glowing a deep emerald, speaking with more than one's voice. Unknown to fear. Nor known to despair. No. Stop. Stop that right now. My shoulders carry the weight of countless dreams. Child lunged with a desperate cry, grasping for his gnosis. Naruto pivoted, dodged his grasping hand, and kicked them away, never pausing in his chant. Yet these hands wish only to heal, the gnosis sang in his chest, a burning beacon filling the world with light. So I declare. A lance of ice exploded against his back, staggering him. Naruto whipped around with a scowl, and froze. Now, a hated voice cooed behind him. Let's not do anything we might regret. Child turned, followed his gaze, and found himself stiffening as well. Heels clicked against the smoldering ashes. Her. Of course it was her. Opportunistic bitch. After all, we wouldn't want to scar the children now, would we? A girl struggled in the newcomer's grasp, bound and gagged. Child took her in at a glance. Red eyes. White hair. Crimson outfit. She meant nothing to him. Not so Naruto, for made a strangled noise. Klee? Ah, so you do know her. Good. Signora stroked the poor child's trembling face, smiling like the serpent she was at heart. Why don't we just talk this out like adults? Drop the kid and walk away. Right now. Do that, and I'll let you live. Rosaline, Signora, could have scoffed at the Archon's impudence. She nearly did at that. The sheer arrogance of his statement all amused her to no end. His was a simple ultimatum meant to counter her before she could even state hers. A preemptive strike, as it were. Pity it was such an ineffective one. Doubtless he thought he could intimidate her as he had Child. Beat her down with sheer force of will. A lifetime ago he might have done just that. Now? Not so tempting, but I shall decline. She flicked an errant look toward her fellow harbinger, watching him scrape himself off the ground. Irrelevant. His part in this was done. He no longer mattered. Allow me to offer you a counterproposal. Surrender your gnosis, and I'll happily let the girl go. Klee struggled in her grasp and shook her head. I'm sorry, Signora crooned, is that gag making it hard to breathe? But out, will ya? At long last, Child found his feet behind her, for all the good it did him. I had things under control. Signora tooted at him, the little fool, not believing him for a moment. You surely did. There was no need for me to step in at all. He didn't budge. You took his kid. So I did. She shrugged a shoulder callously. What of it? He glared at her. The effect was somewhat lessened by his dirty, bruised face. Signorina scoffed at the pitiful display. Weak. Soft. Child always had too much heart to do what must be done. He hesitated at crucial moments. He showed mercy. He would never think to endanger a child, not when he had so many siblings to care for himself. He had shackles of his own making and they limited him. But her? She would do what must be done. She would not hesitate. She would show no mercy. She had no limits. A small part of her wondered if Child would test those limits now. With the Archon present, she might find herself pressed if he turned on her. She'd left her back open after all. A single thrust of his polearm might do her grievous harm if he caught her unawares. And yet still, she didn't dare look away from the Archon. Do you have something to say? Surely he wouldn't betray her. To turn his coat now meant turning his back on the Tsaritsa and his family in Snezhnaya. Child might think himself noble in his own way, but he surely wasn't. At the end of the day, no matter his reservations, the boy was a good dog, one who wouldn't dare bite the hand of its master, if only for fear of what might befall his kin. Sure enough, he tore his gaze from hers. I thought not. Run along now. There's work to be done. Yeah, run along, Child. Naruto never took his eyes off her. That's all you ever do. Fury flashed across the younger harbinger's face. His spear flicked out and severed the gag binding Klee's mouth. The little fire imp spat it out at once, gasping for air. Thanks, mister. Signora's temper sparked. Child. What? A self-same smile was his reward. You said she was having trouble breathing. I was helping. Naruto flicked a curious look his way. Have fun you too. His piece said, the battered harbinger leaned on his spear and limped away, dragging himself back to the city. Signora seethed all the same. Insolent oaf. If she wasn't holding this blasted brat with both hands, she would have charred him to ash on the spot. But she didn't dare let go of Klee, not here, not now, not yet. She was no fool. To do so while he still held that gnosis would mean her death. Yes, this changed nothing. So what if the girl could speak? It would only serve to further impart her peril. Hey, Klee. Naruto turned a whining smile on the child. You good? The girl granted him a tiny, tremulous nod, voice warbling a little. I'm scared. Don't worry, sweetie, his eyes crinkled in a smile. I'll have you out in a jiffy. Now be a good girl and close your eyes. Don't open them until I tell you to, all right? She managed a watery smile. And then kaboom? Yes, Klee, his grin grew. Kaboom. That little fairy of his tilted her head. Kaboom. Signora felt her plans coming unraveled with each passing moment. Did he not understand his situation? Why wasn't he afraid? She had the girl captive, a girl who by all rights, he was fond of. He wouldn't dare risk harm to her. Any movement on his part would be met by swift and immediate violence. In truth, she had no real desire to harm a child, but needs must, and she would do whatever it took to achieve her goals. Yes, she held all the cards here. Her. Not him. So why was he smiling? We'll even get some s'mores after this, Naruto prattled on. How does that sound? Enough. Signora slashed a hand through the air to silence him. Stop that. I am in charge here. The new Archon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Do you feel in charge? Enough. She gripped the girl tighter, pressing a cold finger to her neck. Make your choice. The gnosis or the girl. Now. I haven't all day. Naruto's grin didn't waver for an instant. Paimon balked. No. You can't. Hush. Stay out of this. His arms rose and tugged off his jacket, then the shirt beneath, exposing his bare chest to her wanting eyes. Not unattractive. A shame they were enemies. Shucking the garment aside, he spread his arms, planted his feet, and stood his ground. His intent was obvious and she found herself smiling at the sight. This was a true, proper Archon. She couldn't wait to take his power for herself. She could sense his gnosis even, power incarnate humming just beneath the surface. The Tsaritsa was so pleased with her. Well? The blonde tilted his head. What are you waiting for? I'm right here. Signora took one step forward. Another now. 3, bringing herself within striking distance. Her right hand twitched. Yet still he made no move to attack. Did he think her blind? No, surely not. Either he was truly just that arrogant or he'd simply given in to her demands like a good little monkey. The latter was more likely, or so she told herself. What's wrong? He grinned down at her, looming large. You want my gnosis? Go right ahead. Take it. Take it all. Enough of this provocation. She tossed Klee aside and lunged forward. Her hand stabbed into his chest, burying itself to the wrist. Naruto grunted in quiet pain. Yes. Victory was hers. She felt the gnosis within him waiting for her. All she need do was reach out and claim it for herself. Wrapped her fingers around it, intent to tear it free in an instant. Triumph blazed through her, warm, hot and heady. With its absence he would be powerless and... Wait 1 blood minute. What the hell was this? Signora tugged on the anemone gnosis. Once. Twice. Thrice now. Nothing happened. It didn't budge. Not an inch. Not even iota of movement. Baffled, she planted her free hand against his chest for leverage, arched her back and yanked, only to achieve a similar result. Sweat beaded upon her brow. Why? Why wasn't it working? What madness was this? It was like trying to move a pillar, not a chess piece. A dark voice laughed at her. Did you really think it would be that easy? 5 firm fingers latched onto her hair and yanked. Hard. Gotcha, bitch. Clenched knuckles slammed into Signora's face with impossible speed. She didn't even see them, but oh, by the ice, she felt them. Felt her nose twist, crack, bend all the way to the left as her cheek dented inward and her jaw popped. Momentum had its say, ripping her from his grasp a heartbeat later. And then there was pain. Her world shattered with a scream of agony as she hit the ground, reflexively curling inward on herself as she clutched at her face. How dare you? Blood sluiced down her chin. Do you have any idea who I am? Didn't ask, a boot collided with her ribs, folding her in half to launch her across the blasted plain once more. Don't care, another stomp struck her from on high, blasting the breath from her lungs and all but spearing her into the dirt. Another crater was born as he ground his boot into her stomach. Go screw yourself. Rosaline shrieked and flung a wave of ice in his face, forcing him to block or risk frostbite. The moment he did, she tumbled free. The girl. She scrambled over the lip of the crater, spitting blood, trying to grasp at the last straws of her plan. Take the girl. She needed a hostage again. A golden flicker of light blitzed past, swept her legs, snatched up Klee, and raced toward the city of Mondstadt. Signora blinked and instantly found the Archon standing before again, now with the girl nowhere to be seen. Impossible. No one should be able to move that fast. Her eyes settled on that wretched little fairy of his, left unattended. If she could reach her... Paimon balked. Naruto. Help. Something hard slammed into Signora's back, forcing her face into the mud. Don't touch the kid. Wait. Signora held up a hand to forestall another attack. Let's be reasonable about this. I am reasonable. Naruto advanced upon her with a smile. It did not reach his eyes. I'm going to slowly and reasonably make you wish you were never born. He began to crack his knuckles slowly, one by one, the sound grinding against her ears. Starting right now. Hope you've got a good dental plan. What? A boot smashed into her face. Broken teeth whistled through the air and her scream went with it. Not satisfied, he caught her by the hair and yanked her back in. A forceful fist smashed into the veil covering her right eye, shattering her black crown with it. Pain sent her slumping back, only for him to reel her back in as one would a fish on their hook. She tried to speak. He didn't give her the chance. No words were spoken by him. None given. Jab. Hook. Uppercut. He beat the tar out of her, left, right and center, uncaring for his targets, for the blood staining his knuckles, nor his face. Once. Twice. Thrice. She heard the meaty thwack, every blow an assault to her pride as much as her face. Frantically she flung wave upon wave of ice at him, to no avail. The beating persisted, even as frozen crystals crept across the length of his arms. It was too much. Only a minute in and she snapped. Enough. Fire flashed forth as she released her delusion at long last, with its passing her body becoming liquid fire once more. In an instant she transformed, gaining mass and height where there had been none before. Pain coursed through her, but it was pain of her own making, and with it the crimson witch of flame lived anew. Power surged through her, strength she used to break his grip and blast him back. A grunt of surprise was her only reward. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Not possibly enough. She needed to hear him scream. He had to beg for mercy, cry out her name. Only then would she end his pain. I have lived for 500 years. You are an ant compared to me. Tongues of hungry fire sprang forth at her command, capturing his legs, holding him fast. I will not be slain by the likes of you. Ha! She sneered as he struggled against the flames. What will you do now, fool? Naruto hung his head, blonde hair shading his eyes from view. The ghost of a smile touched his face. Embrace the wind you once called a home. Gaze upon a icy white throne. His hand rose again, and the wind wailed with it, gathering around him in currents of jade light. Signora didn't recognize the words that followed, for it was different from what she'd heard against child. Less of a chant and more a song, these syllables flowed faster than before. Smoother and sharper, louder now, a fire flowing to rival the one that still smoldered between her breasts. Dozens of voices spoke with them, and she knew the Archon passed, for his eyes were a deep and verdant green. Another chant, she raised a hand. My, you're just full of surprises today, aren't you? A legacy of lies. A familière reprise. The fire went out in her heart. Sing with us a song of hurricanes and fate. Naruto's head snapped up and she saw them, emerald veins pulsing from his chest, leading up to his neck, seething in his eyes. The burning pillar cracks beneath its weight. Rosaline her. He was talking to her, or rather, his gnosis was. It was singing a song, a dirge to her death. Death breaks through the day. Hard as a stone. I will not allow it. She lunged at him, grasping for his gnosis with all her might. Last time had been a fluke surely, she'd not brought all her might to bear. Her hand passed right through him. Empty air was her reward, then his hand found her throat. He leaned in. Warm lips brushed her ear, like a long-lost lover's caress. Lost in the void, all alone. All the world went silent, as though they'd entered the eye of a storm. Rosaline's world inverted. Her good eye blinked, not quite comprehending how she'd gotten here, or where the Archon had gone. Where even was here? She looked around and found only blue skies surrounded by looming clouds. Where was the ground? All she saw was an endless expanse of blue and white, no, there below it, so far as to be rendered a speck, shades of green and brown. Gray stone. Was that the city of Mondstadt? Oh, no. No. Realization broke like the dawn. She'd fall. No, she was falling. I wouldn't be worried about that. Wind lashed at Rosaline's back, tearing a deep furrow between her shoulders, drawing an agonized cry from her lips. She pivoted and found only the wind around her. Horror broke. This wasn't the eye of the storm at all, but its center. Another blade of wind raked across her chest. A third took her left ear. On and on they came, faster and faster, a vortex of window tearing into her with reckless abandon. There was naught she could do to defend herself. How did one fight the wind? You didn't. You either embraced it, or you fell. And fall Rosaline did. By some manner of blackest mercy, the impact didn't kill her. She wished it had. Battered and bleeding from countless wounds, death would have been a mercy. Down an ear and an arm now, it was all she could do to drag herself away and pray for the sweet release of death. Today, the gods were not merciful. Naruto landed atop her back. Nudged her hips with a boot, rolling her over. There, he leaned back, considering her. Now you're as ugly on the outside as you are on the inside. Damn him. She would heal from this eventually. She knew she would. She just needed time. It didn't have to be this way, you know. The Archon shook his head, bemoaning her plight. We could have talked this out, you know. Rosaline seethed up at him, desperate to remain defiant in her last moments. I never asked for redemption. Never. Good. Wind keened in Naruto's palm. You're not getting it. Raisin shuriken. Wait. Fear broke through the wall of her resolve at the last, and much to her chagrin, Rosaline flung up a hand to hold him off. She didn't want to die here. She couldn't. She mustn't. There was still so much more she wanted to achieve. It was nothing personal, she quavered, painfully aware of the wind-filled sphere only inches from her chest. This was my task. My duty. My mission, for the good of the world. Don't you see? His face went thunderous and she cursed herself for the whimper that followed. That gnosis will only bring you misery. It will make you one of them. Just like her. I am me. Naruto scowled at her without fear. No one else. His palm swung down, jutsu snarling in his hand. The pain that followed went beyond words. When the darkness came, it promised Rosaline a release from that pain. From the heat, from the wind, from the agony tearing at her flesh, it offered her the sweetest slumber, an escape, an emergency exit, as it were. She had but to give in. Stop fighting. Let her mind go, fall to the depths and cease caring for her plight, for the world, for anything at all. Forget about the noise. Forget about Signora. Forget everything. Oblivion was her only recourse and she yielded it gladly. Anything to stop the pain. Rosaline embraced the dark. What did you do to that Signora lady? Is she even alive? Maybe. Naruto climbed to his feet with a sigh. Maybe not. If she is, she's about to wish she wasn't. A gulp was his reward. Okawe, remind Paimon to always stay on your good side. Forever and always. Noted. He cracked his neck, dusted off his hands, and paused as a pang of guilt pricked his conscience. When he looked back, he found Paimon staring at him with wide, round eyes, hugging both arms to her chest. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked afraid. Not of him, surely. She couldn't be afraid of him. He'd never harm a hair on her head. Didn't she know that? She'd flown out here to check on him after that last attack, arriving only moments ago. And yet the way she was looking at him. No, best nip that in a bud. His face closed down as he loped her way. The tiny fairy shrank back a little. Wait a second. Why are you looking at Paimon like the Her yelp cut off into a startled squeak as he took a hold of her and pulled her into his chest, practically trapping her arms at her sides. She kicked out in surprise for a moment before she realized he wasn't going to harm her, and even then she squirmed a little in his grasp. What are you doing? She sniffled a little, trying to hide her anxiety. You smell funny. Well, that would be all the fire and the smoke. Now, listen. He drew back, holding her at arm's length. I'm still me. Nothing's changed. That wicked bitch of a witch took Klee hostage, so I had to put her down and make sure she stayed down. Hard. I'm still ticked, but not at you. And I need to go deal with some very bad people, very soon. Do you understand? She blinked up at him just a little too quickly. He glimpsed tears on her lashes. She'd been crying. So, you're not mad at Paimon? Nope, he booped her nose with one finger, cutting her off. And I never will be. We'll get something to eat after all this, I promise. I know you're hungry. Something changed in her face. Could we have some more fisherman's toast? We'll have whatever you like. Now be a good girl and stay here, he poked her forehead. I don't want her kidnapping you, too. Got it. Her chin bobbed in a nod and that dazzling smile shone forth once more. Paimon will be careful. He patted her head in return. This time she didn't shy away. That a girl. She hummed happily and didn't budge. With that done, he pivoted and strode toward the harbingers resting. She lay prone in the crater where he'd left, broken and twisted, body curled in on herself in what might well have been her final moments. Was she dead? Alive? Feigning weakness to lull him into a false sense of security so she could take Paimon captive? He needed to know. Had to. Is she alive? Shoo, he waved Paimon down. Stay there. Warily, he nudged Signora's shoulder with a boot and rolled her onto her back, ready for any attack. None came. A muffled groan greeted him instead. He squinted down at her and found her breathing, bloody chest still rising and falling as she coughed fitfully. Stubborn witch. She'd lost an arm and a leg besides, alongside most of her hair, and her body was a lacerated mess, yet she still clung to life, what was left of it. How annoying. On that, he agreed with Kurama. Would it be too much for one of his enemies to just stay dead? That said, the Harbinger's body was a lacerated mess. No surprise there. As a whole, the Raisin Shuriken didn't simply cut you, it attacked your very cells on a molecular level. There could be no greater pain than what he'd inflicted on her. There was a reason he didn't use it on anyone unless he absolutely must. It was, in a word, death. Annihilation pure and simple. Still she'd survived, if only just. He didn't envy her life after this. It would be a miserable one. A terrible thought occurred to him as he glared down at her trembling form. No one in Mondstadt would be surprised if Signora died here. He didn't want her hounding him in the future, either. Paimon couldn't see him down here in the crater. Perhaps it would be better for the world if Signora died in her sleep. His arm rose. And her good eye snapped open. I yield, she saw the cold look in his eye and threw herself on his mercy. I yield. Whatever I did to you, I'm sorry. Naruto closed his heart to her miserable little whimper. He wouldn't be swayed. Not now. She could have lost her memories and he still wouldn't rust her. Was that what she was doing now? Feigning ignorance. Or did she truly not understand what she had done to upset him? No matter. If this was a trick of some sort, he wouldn't fall for it. I have a message for your Tsaritsa. He gripped her by her hair, what was left of it, and hauled her up. You're going to drag yourself to her and deliver it for me. Listen closely now. It's very important. He leaned closer still, eyes blazing with green anemo light. She quivered under his livid stare. Leave me alone. Signora gibbered something that might have been a word in some circles. He wasn't sure. In the end, it didn't matter. Her good eye rolled back in her head and she fainted dead away. He let her slump to the ground, knelt down now, and slung her over his shoulder as one might a particularly surly sack of flour. Good riddance to bad rubbish. He never wanted to deal her again after this. At least Child had some semblance of honor, rudimentary though it was. He knew he couldn't stay here much longer. Mondstadt was nice, but he didn't feel welcome here. And besides, he had a conversation to finish. With an weary sigh, the whiskered warrior sat down, closed his eyes and focused on his gnosis. Wasn't hard to do, it was still resonating in his chest despite the bitter interruption, all too eager to take up the task. Really, all he had to do was trace the connection back to its source, follow the flow and, there. He felt something. Kurama didn't say a word and let him focus on it. The strange sensation grew stronger in his chest. He felt another tug, like gentle branches enfolding his spirit. And the world fell away. Naya was waiting in the void when he opened his eyes. She looked quite startled to see him, all things considered. You came back? Of course I did. He looked around, mildly nonplussed by the empty expanse. Is this going to be a recurring theme here? She gave him a small, sad, shy little smile. I'm afraid so. I've never had much in the way of belongings and I'm still rather trapped where I am. His nostrils flared in anger as he saw the sadness and sorrow in those luminescent green eyes. Protect the child. How could anyone hurt such a small, precious being? I just wanted to tell you I'm headed your way. He planted a fist on his hip. Or I will be, in a few minutes. Just wanted to give you a heads up. His conscience jabbed him. Jabbed him hard. He yielded to it with a grumble. And I might be a little rough with your sages. Her face closed down. You said you wouldn't kill them. I said I would try not to. It all depends on their response to my questions. Wait. You're coming here? Now. Horror dawned across her face, but with it, hope. No. You can't just run over here and start popping heads. She shook a finger at him. Never mind the fact that you're not that fast. It would take you a few days at least to make it to Sumeru. Kurama scoffed amidst his thoughts. Dear girl, you have no idea. His eyes sparked. Wanna bet? She spluttered helplessly. What about your city? Naruto laughed yet again. Mondstadt was in good hands. After all, I'm not the only one whose order was disrupted today. Rosaria hit the ground in a heap. What was that? What the devil are you? Golden eyes considered her. Order. And the sky answered. He bid his goodbyes to a worried Nahida and opened his eyes. The faint sound of rapidly approaching footsteps snapped him back to reality. Naruto. Paimon yelped a heartbeat later, voice peaking with distress. Somebody's here. Aha! A relatively unfamiliar voice called over the lip of the crater. So this is where that storm came from. Cresting the crater, he found a familiar face staring back at him. Hadn't he seen her before? He vaguely remembered that bow and her outfit. Amber, right, he distantly remembered hearing her name somewhere. Aha! Now he remembered. One of Mondstadt's outrider knights. Perfect timing. A quick toss dropped the insensate Signora in her arms. Put this one on a boat to Snezhnaya. Need her to deliver a message for me. Or toss her in a cell, he amended, recalling Child's retreat to the city. He could always use him as a messenger instead. I don't care. The poor girl flinched. That might cause a diplomatic incident. Did he care? Not in the least. Does she look like she's in any condition to protest? Amber glanced down, only now noticing the woman's wounds. What did you do to her? He looked back to the wretched woman who once called herself Rosaline. What does it look like? The shattered harbinger whimpered in her sleep. I think you broke her. Good, he scoffed. There are some things worse than death. She never asked for redemption and she ain't getting it now. Her brow furrowed. Not to judge, but isn't that a little harsh of you? A blonde brow rose in mild annoyance. And your point is? Yeesh, the girl shivered. Jean was right. You're scary. Only to my enemies, he waved her down. Just take care of that witch. I have places to be. What's the rush? Everything. Every second he let those sages keep Nahida sealed away was an affront to all honor and decency. Every instant in which Grand Sage Azar drew breath enraged him to no end. It was almost ironic, he didn't think he was capable of this kind of raw, visceral hatred anymore. You learn something new every day it seemed. Of course, he couldn't say that. Not aloud. Diplomatic incidents and all that. Real hush-hush. Besides, if he said something, Amber might try to stop him. Instead, he granted her a wry grin. Things to do, places to be, people to kill. My Lord Archon, she balked, pure girl that she was. One of those things sounds illegal. Probably because it is, he couldn't help but smile at her gobsmacked expression. Say, you don't mind looking after Paimon for a few hours, do you? The young knight winced under his gaze. I don't know. Too bad, wasn't a request, take the small child. Paimon objects. He pivoted, quirking a blonde brow her way. To what? Staying behind? No. The little imp huffed and crossed both arms before her chest. To you leaving without saying goodbye. It was almost adorable, watching her pout. He found his brief burst of anger much softened for it. I'm coming right back, you know. Paimon made angry Paimon noises. Naruto felt his lips twitch in a small, rueful smile. It was such a Paimon thing to do. All right, he strode back to her and reached down to tousle her hair affectionately. I'm off, Paimon. I'll be sure get you an extra helping of fisherman's toast when I get back. Her happy cry healed his soul. All right, then. She beamed to send him off as a daughter might their father on a long journey. Take care and come back soon. Of course he would. He knew exactly where he was going. And so he did. Simple as. Run, Naruto. Run. Azar had no use for his failed god. Some might say it wasn't a matter of emotion, but logic. He disagreed with that theory. He despaired her for both logic and emotion. As Grand Sage of Sumeru Academia, he considered himself a learned man, and as a learned man, he knew full what Archons were, or at least he believed he did. Archon were akin to gods, beings that stood apart from humanity, capable of feats far beyond mere mortals and their visions. The very existence of one staved off the threat of war. They were beings beyond compare, shining beacons to which all aspired. In that regard, Lesser Lord Kusanali was, in every way, a disappointment to him. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata's successor was a failure, a pale shadow of she who had come before. Truly, she would have wept to see her. What could she even do? Nothing. Less than nothing. No, a new god was required. Aprupearkon. An offer had been made by an old colleague toward such a goal, one he and the sages, most of them, had happily accepted. Those who resisted were summarily locked away in their quarters and placed under heavy guard until such a time as their goal reached fruition. He and his 3 cohorts were even now considering how best to go about it behind closed doors. Knock. As one, the sages stilled. Azar looked toward one of said door, irked by the noise. Begone. We do not wish to be disturbed. Knock. Knock. He scowled. Are you deaf? I said leave us be. Cease that at once. Knock. 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 And still the tapping persisted. His face purpled in anger. I will have you expelled. The door burst open, all but flying from its hinges to admit someone was most assuredly neither a scholar nor a sage. The brute looked positively haggard, like he'd come fresh from a sight. Yet his eyes burned a wild, raw shade green. As did his chest. Those keen eyes narrowed upon at them as someone stepped through, framed by blonde hair and whiskered cheeks set in a stern scowl. And despite that, or perhaps in spite of it, he sounded almost happy to see them. Hello friends. None of the sages dared speak. His comrades looked to Azar to lead them, as they always did. Azar bridled. Who are you? Who let you in here? Explain yourself. In order? All right. A rush of wind carried him forward. Naruto, me, myself and he took a quick, shallow breath to continue, I wanted to have a little chat with you. I'm guessing you're the sages. Azar puffed up indignantly. The gall of it all. The unmitigated gall. We are indeed. I only see 4 of you. Shouldn't there be 6? A pause now, as he seemed to listen to a voice only he could hear. Oh, I see. Only 4 of you consented to this. Sealing her away. Where are the other two? He looked among them, regarding them as one might a pack of petulant children. Did you try to lock them up as well? Did you kill them? You dare to suggest? Shhhhh, a finger pressed to his lips, shushing him. Your voice is starting to make me angry. Trust me, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. I have just one question for you. He made a vague pinching motion with the other hand for emphasis. One tiny little inquiry. Answer that for me, and I'll be on my merry way. Speak it then, and never darken our doorstep again. Azar smacked his hand away. What did it matter? This fool would be dead soon enough once the guards arrived. Dead men told no tales. How little he knew. How very little. All right, the blond man, whom he was beginning to suspect was much more than that, tilted his head to regard. Why did you seal her away? An icy pang of dread rang frigid fingers down Azar's spine, chilling him to the bone. He knew. How did he know? It shouldn't be possible. Indignation rushed in, smothering his fear. Another mistake on his part. Gods exist on a plane that far eclipses humanity's, you ignorant fool. He failed to see the slight twitch in the man's jaw. Lesser Lord Kusanali, what can she even do? Care for the people? Fend off sandstorms? Fabricate sili feritales? Bah! A scoff slipped past his lips as he shook his head, and in doing so, he also failed to see the look of murderous rage flit across the youth's face as he stepped closer. In truth, the ascension of this so-called Lesser Lord has brought nothing but bewilderment to the scholars. With that in mind, it is better to keep her isolated in the sanctuary so our academy will not become embroiled in turmoil. Laughter burst out of the intruder, startling him. How rude! For he was laughing now, clutching his sides as he doubled over, shoulders quivering with repressed mirth. Had he taken leave of his senses? Stop that, he spluttered. Stop laughing this instant, you reprobate. That's your reason? Remarkably, he did just that, wheezing out one final chuckle. Because you thought she wasn't good enough? I thought you might at least have a good one, but you really are a rotten piece of dung, aren't you? All right, he straightened up, wiping a mirthful tear out the corner of his eye. No need to feel bad about this then. Bad about what? Naruto grabbed the nearest sage by his throat and snapped their neck to the left. The awful sound of broken bone and shattered sinew filled the air. Screams went up. Azar skittered backward, eyes bulging at the sudden execution. Guards. No response came from the adjacent hallway. None at all. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. Guards. They're not coming. Naruto cast the corpse aside and made a sweeping gesture with his hand. A visceral blade of unseen air cut another sage in twine. His severed halves toppled to the floor. Azar stumbled back, blood spattered across his face. The third screamed and tried to flee. It didn't save them. The blonde beast slung some sort of spell after them. It struck their back and they simply ceased to be, disintegrating outright. All that remained were their bloody shoes and stains against the wall. Only then did he deign to face him. Do you understand now? He held up a hand, wind singing in his palm. There was no vision to be seen on his personage. What I am? Azar choked. You're a... I'm an Archon, you vicious little shit. We look after our own. Azar's vaunted mind fizzled. He tried to retreat. His spine struck a wall. Naruto waded in after him, ripped a desk aside, and grabbed him by the collar of his robe. For a land revered for its wisdom, you're not being very wise. Try not to bleed everywhere, would ya? All these stains are murder on my clothes. The Anemo Archon swept an idle hand through his hair as he spoke, a red eye gleaming between the gaps of his fingers. I don't want Paimon to see any blood when I get back. Azar opened his mouth to speak. Wait. Clenched knuckles crashed into his face, shattering his front teeth and rendering his nose a red ruin. He toppled backward, clutching his face. The assault didn't end there. Even as his back met the ground, a knee slammed into his chest, pinning him to the hard, cold, unfeeling floor. Green eyes met his. No words were given. No threats issued. No quarter offered. The blonde's arm swung back. And then there was only pain. Fist after fist found Azar, slamming his head back into the floor with alarming regularity. 3 punches. 4 punches. 5, now. They thundered down on his face and skull. His world swayed side to side as a bloody fell over his vision. His monocle shattered beneath the beating, digging wicked shards of glass into his eye. He tried to cover his face to no avail, his arms were beaten, battered, broken, and brushed aside. Time ceased to be, to having any meaning to him. There was only pain. Finally, he found some semblance of his voice. Mercy. Here at last, the beating paused. Azar slumped with a whimper. Mercy? Naruto blinked back at him, and said whimper became a bloody gurgle as another fist found his throat. There is no mercy. Cold green eyes gazed down into his bloody, swollen face, uncaring of the blood all over him. Don't worry. I won't kill you. See, I'm starting to realize something. He leaned down to leer at him. Death is easy. You don't get the easy way out. Not after what you did. Horror dawned and with it, realization. No, 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 wait please. I beg of you. Naruto's fist descended anew. Azar screamed. And screamed again. Screamed some more, now. Nahida heard it. A faint shattering, like so much glass. She felt it a heartbeat later, the cracking of her cage. Her eyes remained closed, so she couldn't see, but she could hear all the same. Incredulity and fear reared their ugly heads in her ears. He couldn't be that fast. No one was. Not even the Electro Archon. It just wasn't possible. Time got funny here in her cage, but she was sure it had only been a few minutes. Never mind getting here, he must have made it past the sages, which meant, well, it meant they were dealt with. She could not find it in her heart to be angry about that. Another crack etched itself into the emerald sphere containing her. She didn't need to see it to hear it. When was the last time someone had gone to such lengths for her? She couldn't remember. There had never been such a time. And yet here he was, a new Archon, younger than her, doing what none had done before him. The cage shattered, and with it, the wards binding her. Her eyes opened. There he was. Waiting for her. Bloody, but triumphant. Smiling. Seeing that smile felt like coming home, finding a haven, shelter she'd never realized was there. Yo. Naruto waved a hand, sauntering her way as she descended to the ground. Should I say it's nice to meet you? Nahida felt her eyes burned with unshed tears. The emotion startled her. That's my line. Sorry, he managed to look a little sheepish. Wanna start over? That tore it, a hiccup tore out of her, followed by a sob. She leaped into his arms. Delightful. Simply delicious. What a truly delectable experiment this had become. Unexpected variables were often impossible to account for in every given field test, but Dator found the results of this sudden shift to be most amusing indeed. Here was a being who, some time ago, had been a mere mortal, very much so. He had come not from Teyvat, but somewhere beyond it. Now he was as a god, increasing his power day by day, laying harbingers low left, right and center. Two had already been made fools of, with a third well on the way if he deigned to turn his attention to Inazuma. With each victory, his curiosity only grew. Now it could be denied no longer. The itch to know, to discern what he was, why, it was overpowering. The potential loss of one segment of himself would be regrettable perhaps, but he just had to see. How long would it be until he broke free from even these confines to stand above the very archons themselves and become so much more? Yes, that settled it. He had to meet him. He simply must, if only to have his answers. And so when the opportunity presented itself, he acted upon it. How wonderful it was to be free. For the longest time the walls of her cage were all that Nahida had seen, all she had known, all she'd thought to ever be, never to be experienced in any meaningful fashion beyond her dreams. It was something she had thought herself at peace with, an unrequited longing that she would never see fulfilled. When one was a god or goddess in her case, one learned to live with loss. Yet here she was. Free. How's it feel? She looked up at Naruto and squeezed his hand with a merry grin. Like so many things. The sunlight on her skin, the grass between her toes, the crisp air in her lungs, the simple act of walking through Sumeru, through her city, all these were things she'd taken for granted. She'd never thought to cherish a simple walk in the park as she did now, yet here she was, walking amongst the common folk, hand in hand with her. What was Naruto exactly? A new Archon, yes of course, but he'd taken on a more protective role since he'd first freed her from her cage. What was he? Her guardian? Her protector? Or perhaps no. Bad thoughts. Don't go there. Still, after being sealed for so long, she truly found herself enjoying her first true trek outdoors. Everywhere she looked she found familiar faces and places. It felt like coming home. Most of Sumeru didn't recognize her as their god. How would they, when she'd only been able to visit them in their dreams? But that would be changing soon, too. There was so much she wanted to see, so much she needed to do. Just thinking of it made her giddy. After so many dark days the future was finally bright. Someone clapped behind them, a hot knife searing through her thoughts. Slowly, ponderously, the sound echoed in the afternoon. And she heard him. Such a touching moment. A voice like the darkest ice pervaded the air behind them. I've been lingering here far too long, but finally, I have the chance to be alone with you too. The crisp sound of approaching boots reached her ear and not at all in a pleasant way. All the precious time I wasted has finally paid off, albeit not as I'd expected. Might I have a moment of yours? Naruto heaved a sigh beside her. Can't we just have one day? Nahida turned to face their interloper. Oh, no. A masked man smiled back at them as he approached, his attire even more eccentric than the sage's. His outlandish attire threw her for a moment, before she recognized him. However weakened and isolated she might be, she was still the goddess of wisdom after all. She knew many things, and moreover, she knew this man's face. Even if she hadn't, his presence gave him away. Her mind fizzled for a moment, then rattled off what she already knew in her heart. Dator. The second harbinger. Completely and utterly beyond her. Naruto stepped forward. Oi. Don't even think about it, pal. For an awful moment, she thought he really would. Think about what? The harbinger replied. I've found so little of interest among the dead sage's research, until I learned of your arrival. As such, I'm here to negotiate with you. Naturally, I won't do anything dangerous that could potentially damage our relationship. Negotiate with me? Nahida put on a brave face and tilted her head, quietly praying for the passerby, many of whom were utterly unaware of the harbinger in their midst. What could I possibly have that you want? She had an inkling, but she wasn't about to say it aloud. Why are you here in Sumeru? The harbinger smiled softly. Allow me to phrase it this way. I am not in Sumeru, yet I remain in Sumeru. When his words failed to get a rise out of them, he only tooted. Alas, it seems even the god of wisdom is restricted by the habits of cognition. How disappointing. Cognition? Oh, dear. There's more than one of you, isn't there? An astute guess. The harbinger granted her a brief bout of patronizing applause. Even the same individual will have different cognitions at different ages, or times. Wouldn't you agree, Anemo Archon? Naruto raised a fist. Only thing I agree on is kicking your ass. Peace, he held up a hand to forestall an attack. I'm not here for your gnosis. I know what happened to Signora and have no desire to repeat her mistake. Her fellow Archon made a baffled noise. Already? How? Am I aware of her condition? Please. Dator made an amused noise. I am a scholar. I know much. It is allowed to me. Which is why I was dispatched to ensure a cessation of hostilities, as it were. Dread gripped Nahida's heart in an icy vice. Then you're here to fight? Perhaps, or perhaps not, his shoulders rolled in a shrug. The Tsuritsu's instructions weren't terribly clear. This particular segment of me is inherently selfish, and though better suited to conversation, still quite capable in combat. As to your earlier question, a long time ago, I made a major decision in hopes of preserving all my perspectives of how I observed the world. He looked past them, masked visage gazing upon something only he could see. Observation is the first step of any experiment, but observing the current world doesn't satisfy me. It lacks an important dimension. That of time. So I saved segments of all my ages and made them into independent individuals. His head swung back to them, no, to Naruto, considering. I suppose you could say it rather resembles another techniques of yours. That's all there is to it. Naruto inched forward, subtly placing himself between the two of them. If you would be so kind as to indulge me. Dator noticed in an instant. How do the gods of freedom and wisdom find my method of seeking knowledge? Her lips pursed. It's an insult to the very concept of life. The harbinger granted her the gray, grim ghost of a smile. And yet you tolerate his so easily. Because the clones he used remember and returns to the whole. Her temper slipped its leash for a moment before she reeled it back in. Life inherently has many rules and restrictions, each with its own significance and reason to exist. They can't be broken on a whim. HMHMHM, the dulcet tones of his laughter instantly set her on edge, leaving her feeling like she'd just stepped into his trap. Good. Amazing, even indeed, it's difficult for humans to make peace with themselves, not to mention oneself from a different period. He looked back to Naruto, masked face reflecting nothing. What would you say to your past self if you met him now? Would you call him naive? Foolish? A greedy brat grasping for attention? Naruto didn't rise to the bait, bless him. That's not who I am anymore. Dator tapped a finger to his mask. And yet you prove my point merely by opening your mouth. This was getting out of hand. She had to regain control of the conversation before things became dangerous. If you've been lurking here in the academia all this time, why wait until now to show up? You could very well have stopped me from being freed. Simple. Let me ask you this, would any staff member ever help the subject in the midst of an experiment? Her lips parted in annoyance, but he seized the initiative from her like a leaf in the wind. Granted, it was my experiment you upended the whole of, but I was curious to see what you would do. And you certainly didn't disappoint. He looked to the blood on the blonde's hands and smiled. Just like the Shogun's twisted toy, you two are driven by emotion. Was he really that eager to provoke a fight between the two of them? You really are crazy. Crazy? Dr. tooted at her like the child she wasn't. How rude. I'll have you know I'm first and foremost a scholar above all things. Such results should be left to the hypothetical me confront with said outcome. But you're right, he steepled his fingers, and that's exactly why I'm so proud of the conclusion of this experiment, though I had hoped he would devour you and use your power to fuel his own. There he went again, throwing poison in their faces. It might have been interesting to see two Gnosis fuse. It was a testament to Naruto's self-control that he didn't lunge at him then and there. Come a little closer and we'll see who's devoured. No, Dr. hummed, I don't think I will. Nahida took a breath to steady herself. Calm. Focus. Relax. Her lashes fluttered in a slow blink. When next they opened she found her center once more. She was safe. However vulnerable she might be in this moment, she still had an ace up her sleeve. And she had Naruto. Whatever this doctor intended, if he made a move towards her, he'd not escape without a fight. As an individual, you don't have any sense of belonging, doctor, and even fewer convictions than a typical scholar. How sad. Oh, no, the self-proclaimed scholar shook his head. I certainly have my own convictions. They just don't fit with your standards, that's all. All right, that's enough conversation for today. The experiment is over and it's time to tidy up the equipment and reclaim any useful materials. For example, your Gnosis. Two shadow clones appeared on either side of him in a plume of smoke, barring his passage. Curious, he prodded one with a finger. They're quite solid. Nahida hoped the warning would deter him. It did not. Come now, Lesser Lord Kusanali. The Harbinger looked back to her and for an awful moment she could have sworn she saw the eyes behind his mask. You're an intelligent Archon. I'm sure you understand the disparity in our combat abilities at this time, but then we have you. He looked to Naruto. You are an enigma. I have less data on you than I'd like, and what little I do possess is biased. Didn't you say you were here to negotiate with us? She planted a tiny fist on her hip to regard him. It's starting to sound like you intend to take it by force, now. As ever, the doctor remained unflappable. I'm merely stating a fact. After all, I'm also a scholar. Naturally, I hope to show proper respect and dignity to the God of wisdom, even in such a reduced state. Her mind fizzled. Reduced? Naruto flung out an arm. The motion rallied her. Focus. Dator was trying to confuse her. Nahida leaned past his limb to stick out her tongue. Your hypocrisy really is built on absolute confidence, isn't it? I understand your scheme, and if I were alone, I might have fallen for it, but as you can see I'm not alone. She touched a hand to her chest, and the Gnosis within. And you failed to account for something. Dator dared a step forward. And what might that be? Naruto flung out a hand, fingers splayed. Me. The doctor grunted in surprise as the wind struck him, hurling him back into a wall. Cracks spread across the stone in a startling spiderweb behind him, yet for all that he never once cried out. People turned to look at such a sudden explosion of violence, while others fled, but Dator remained unfazed. He stood with an effort, ran a hand through his hair and straightened up once more. For all intensive purposes, he remained utterly at his ease. And then his mask cracked. Right down that angular middle, revealing his face. In that instant, Nahida glimpsed one of his eyes. So cold. So inhuman. No, that wasn't quite right. It was almost as if he was. An arctic chill seized her very soul. Were it not for Naruto, she might have frozen then and there. Curious. Dator adjusted his mask, concealing his face once more. As I said, I'm not alone. She forced a smile she didn't quite feel, not after seeing the meticulous monster behind the moss. Two Gnosis resonating as one, in perfect sync, who knows what might transpire. Why, it might even awaken the heavenly principles. Dator went still. Nahida smiled inwardly. Gotcha. It was a bluff of sorts, one she wasn't entirely sure would work. And yet, do you dare to gamble such a possibility with me? Gamble, a rare frown marred the doctor's face. How surprising. I thought you would use evidence or rigorous reasoning to prove your point. The word gamble is the last thing I expected to hear from the god of wisdom. Funny, Naruto chortled, because I gamble all the time. So it would seem, the harbinger made an annoyed noise and crossed both arms before his chest. One could argue that every experiment is a gamble. But this is a clever move. To think you'd see through me so easily. As a scholar, I respect all possibilities. This has always been my principle and is an essential trait as an experimenter. Together, the two of you might overcome me here and now. Indeed, he thumbed his chin, I can't ignore this possibility. So tell me then, what are your conditions? We have several. Naruto took the lead and she practically beamed with pride, happy to see him showing some initiative at last. Your little ceasefire, for one. We'll accept it, for now. After all, Nahida chimed in, as the one who initiated this cascade of events here in Sumeru, shouldn't you pay the corresponding price? Price, he considered them curiously. Interesting. What price would you have me pay, precisely? She sensed weakness and pounced. How about erasing all your other segments? Ha! A bitter bark of laughter startled her. So this is how you wish to restrict me, the most threatening opponent of the nation of wisdom. A fist clenched at his side for the merest of moments and she felt something monstrous rise in him, before he quelled it again. What you request of me is like plucking out the eyes I have placed in the dimension of time itself. That cracked mask turned to face her once more, blank as the eye within. Segments are exceptionally difficult to make. They require extremely rare resources and enormous amounts of time and effort. Requiring me to destroy them all here and now, bravo. A suitably wise decision on your part. But what does your comrade have to say? Naruto tensed. I agree with her. Do you, now? The doctor's smile was sly, almost serpentine. How very interesting. His eye swiveled behind the mask, fixing her in its gaze once more. Can I assume that you've long been wary of me? Among all the versions of me, this segment you see now is the most selfish. If it weren't me, your idea wouldn't have worked. What have you seen of me, I wonder? You must have been observing me, how else would you have known I've long grown tired of their endless doubts and arguments? Now it was her turn to smile. Like you said, it's difficult to make peace with yourself. Brilliant though you are, have you managed to do that? I see, he made an annoyed noise. If you think all those versions of me are worth a ceasefire, then deal. Is the relationship between all of you really that bad? Dator merely shook his head. I don't think there's any need to dwell on that. The surplus versions of me can simply be exchanged for something far more useful than their existence. Do you think anyone can offer themselves at a higher price? Besides, with my abilities, it's only a matter of time until I find better perspectives. There it was, that sly smile again, a subtle warning not to ignore the snake in the grass. Perhaps it's best to say you're just temporarily ahead. But how can you be sure that I've really erased them? I could lie, after all. She held out a hand. That's well within the realm of possibility, but I can see your remaining honesty. Naruto stepped up beside her. And if you don't, I'll kill you where you stand. You honestly believe you can, don't you? Dator rasped a laugh. You might be one of the few who can, very well. His visible eye closed for a moment and the air shuddered around them. Nahida felt a flicker in the air, like a ripple in the pond. Well? Have you confirmed that it's complete? It was. Against all odds, he'd kept his word. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. With this, the Fatui would be crippled in Sumeru for some time. And even if they weren't, weakening their number 2 would set them back months, if not years. It was a fair trade, she felt. But she wasn't finished yet. The future of Sumeru City will be in my hands alone, she declared, forcing herself to meet that eldritch, icy gaze behind Dator's mask. Once we've solved the current problem plaguing my people, I will shut down the Akasha to let curiosity and the thirst for knowledge drive the realm of academics once more. There won't be any further gaps for you to exploit. A pity. Dator feigned a shrug he clearly didn't feel. It truly pains me that my academic achievements have never been appreciated in my homeland. Of course, I have no interest in being rejected by this city for a third time. And what of your gnosis? There was the ice again, creeping through her veins. She scowled at him for it. Don't be greedy, harbinger of Sneznaya. No, came the rejoinder, this is a different transaction. If you intend to turn off the Akasha anyway once you've dealt with your problem, there's no further use for the gnosis of Sumeru, is there? She didn't dignify that with a response, and of course he took the opportunity to twist his black knife in her heart. Don't find that agreeable? Very well. Then let's think of it this way. Since you're the god of wisdom, how about I exchange some knowledge with you? His visible eye sought Naruto as well. Something that would benefit you both. A Rasengan snarled in Naruto's grasp. You can take your knowledge and shove off. She was curious. What manner of knowledge? Naruto heaved a sigh. The means and manner by which to return you to your former glory. He must have seen the confusion flash across her face, because his smile grew cold indeed. The only way to do so, in fact. Or hadn't you realized? Accept it at your leisure and you'll be restored to your proper form in good time. And if, when it succeeds, you'll know that I was right. All I ask in return is your gnosis when the time comes. On that day, I will come and collect what I am owed. Is that not reasonable of me? Her head ached. Was this why they called her lesser? Had she truly been something, someone, before this? She didn't want to believe it, and yet, arrogant as that is, it has piqued my knowledge. Naruto stifled his Rasengan with a sigh. Doctor told them his secret. And her eyes widened. Excellent. The not-so-good doctor hummed, oozing satisfaction. With negotiations, we've all gotten what we wanted. I'm very glad I got to meet you like this. And as for you, Anemo Archon, allow me to offer a piece of parting advice, from one who breaks the laws of nature, to another. Naruto made an annoyed gesture. Out with it, then. You are not from this world. Doctor seemed to relish in the flinch his remark caused. Under normal circumstances, it shouldn't be possible for you to acclimatize with a gnosis so thoroughly, yet here you are, the very exception to the rule. That Barbatos truly made a fascinating creation. I doubt even he realized the gem that fell into his lap that day. Naruto didn't strike. There was no need. His stare was deadly enough. How easily you allow yourself to be shackled by others, the corner of Dodor's mouth curled in a sardonic smile. It's nauseating. You've so much potential, yet you waste it twisting yourself into knots for their sake, cavorting to their whims and never your own. If you continue to do so, you'll lose everything. Nahida winced as a look of absolute murder passed across Naruto's face. Nevertheless, he held himself in check. Is that all you have to say? It is. I'll be watching your career with great interest. I'm curious to see how the other nations treat you, devourer of gods. He bowed abruptly and conjured a rush of frozen mist, summarily vanishing into it. In a blink he was gone, leaving only his parting remark behind. Nahida considered the fading haze with a sigh. Well, he's going to be a problem down the road. Maybe, Naruto shrugged, let's not worry about him for now. But the Fatui are my problem. He patted her head, and sat down beside a tree, drawing a sullen pout to her lips. You just focus on getting better. She plunked down at his side with a sigh of her own, winded. I hadn't realized how anxious I truly was until he finally left. Yeah. He leaned back against the worn oak. Bastard reminds me of Orochimaru. And not in a good way. Orochi what? Story for later. He yawned. Sleepy now. Her brow twitched at his blasé deflection. Ignore her, would he? Fine. Two could play that game. It was her duty as his senior to keep an eye on him, after all. Her head landed in his lap as she sprawled out beside him. Naruto made a bemused noise at her antics, yet didn't protest. But he did chuckle. You're not going to let me get up, are you? No, she smacked his knee with a hand. I'm stressed. Silence stretched between the two of them. Nahida savored it, knowing it would be the calm before the storm. Naruto. Earlier, what Dator said, she creaked a green eye open to regard him. What did he mean, about restoring me? Was I really? Wheel, he drawled and looked away with a rueful laugh, scratching a whiskered cheek. I'm not entirely sure about it myself. I'm guessing it's a long complicated story. For now, we're not in any hurry to go anywhere. Those placid blue eyes met hers, flecked with a hint of anemo green. We've got all the time in the world. I'll take you back to Mondstadt for a bit after this, gather the gang, and then we can fix up Sumeru together. Sound good? Her lower lip trembled a little. And afterward? We'll cross or burn those bridges when we come to them. He rolled one shoulder in a carefree shrug. If he knew how much he resembled Barbatos in that moment, he might have scowled. For now, think of this as a vacation, be a good girl, and enjoy your nap. She spluttered half-heartedly. No fair, bossing me around. You're younger than me. Maybe, but I'm also taller, he winked. Therefore, I win. He was teasing her, she knew. Trying to distract her. Blast, but it was working. When was the last time she felt like this? A curious feeling swelled up in Nahida's heart. Her eyes widened. Ah. She recognized this. It had been so long since she'd truly felt such an emotion. Not simple joy or relief, this went far beyond both, transcending the physical and emotional plane to buoy her spirits. She knew the word. Oh yes, she knew it well, though she'd not dared to speak it in an age. What she was feeling now, what spurred a tiny little smile to her lips, unleashed a storm of butterflies in her stomach and made her heart beat faster than it had in centuries. A single word encapsulated it all. Love. Oh, dear. She'd fallen for him. Could gods fall in love? Was it allowed? Will you, she gulped, still be here, when I wake up? He ran a gentle hand through her hair. As long as you like. A delicate yawn parted her pale lips. That might be a while. The new Archon only hummed. Then I'll stay with you until you're content. Her heart hitched at the thought of him ever leaving. What happens if I'm never content? He laughed, utterly unaware of the enormity of what she was asking. Then I guess I'd better get comfortable, eh? It would do. Right now she just wanted to cuddle down with him and nape together in the shade. A tiny giggle fled from her lips. I think I'd rather like that. Her piece said. Nahida finally closed her weary eyes. Naruto did the same, his breath evening out. And if he held her close, she didn't mind. Sleep came all too quickly. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share and support the original writer. See you in the next video?